Hello, hello. Oh my goodness. It's another time that we're together. So glad to be here this evening or this morning, this afternoon, whatever time frame you're on. I am Reverend Dr. Barry Staple once again coming to you with a program. I'm part of we're Race and Cultures Bridging the Divides. And Race and Cultures Bridging the Divides is actually a component of Race and Ethics Corporation. So I'm glad that you're here with me today. And once again, oh boy, what am I? We are in the throes of being woke again. Oh my goodness. If you see this, oh yeah, there's stuff in here now. It's pretty good Java, as we call it. What is woke exactly? I've been talking to you about this. I'm going to do it until the cows come home. I don't really know when the cows do come home, but I guess they come home sometime. But first of all, woke, to be awake and to be woke is a badge of honor, knowledge, and also wisdom. They say Solomon was the wisest man in the world. His mother Bathsheba had a talk with him. Of course, in the book when she's talking to Lemuel the king, is is by tradition is believed that was Bathsheba talking to her son Solomon on how to acquire a virtuous wife. So wisdom to be woke. Even Solomon had to be woke. Number two, what woke means to have or be marked by an active awareness of systemic injustices and prejudices, and we can throw in racism there, especially those related to civil and human rights. Come on now, people. We're witnessing a lot of that out there in this world today. Number three, to be woke is to be wise, open minded, and empathetic. And as I said many times, someone tried to tell us empathy was something of a new age era. As far as I'm concerned, to be empathic or to be able to give empathy is something that's always existed. And finally, what is woke? The opposite of asleep. So if you are woke, all those things fit. Don't get it twisted. People have been trying to tell you if you acquire an education or knowledge about something, oh, that's being woke. Well, it should be able to read, to be able to communicate, to use terms and to talk openly about race and culture. Otherwise, what are we doing? We're not really learning, are we? One of the things that's been happening that's kept me awake and woke, so many things going on in my mind. Remember, as we talk about race and cultures, you say, for example, the United States culture, trying to align ourselves to be harmonious, to have homeostasis with one another. We have different cultures living in this world. I heard a fellow podcaster, they like using the word multiculturalism. And that's great because we do have multicultures in this country, but we have a group of people that are trying to separate and create divisiveness within cultures. But we are to have in the United States of America something that's important to all of us, and that's democracy. So as I was thinking about this episode, my mind, my woke mind went back. And I thought about all the presidents that I have studied or, being in school that as I was growing up. So I want to share real quickly about presidents because this episode is dealing with the Epstein files, presidents from Eisenhower, excuse the typo there, from Eisenhower to Trump, Adelita Rojava, and also Representative Jasmine Crockett. So I want us to focus on that. So I want to talk about the presidents that have been um, in my lifetime, all the way up to the present. So I want to just share this with you to give you an idea about what I'm talking about. So when I was growing up, first president I remember, I never talk about my age, but you can look at the date of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. There was another president before him, but the one that I remember distinctly reading about, they called him Ike. From Dwight Eisenhower to Donald J. Trump, U.S. presidents. So President Trump, we doesn't get this, and Hexas doesn't get this. What was so significant, Dwight D. Eisenhower was a five-star general and supreme commander of Allied forces in World War II. He had those stripes. He earned those bars. Key aspects of President Eisenhower, I want you to just focus on the character of these presidents. But he presided over a period of peace and prosperity, focused on modern republicanism. In other words, caring for people. The major events that Eisenhower was involved in was signed the National Defense Education Act and created NASA in response to the Soviet launch of Sputnik. And I remember that when Sputnik, and then we developed it. I was studying weekly readers and talking about Sputnik, and but he authorized the creation. This is so important: the creation of the vast interstate highway system. Before that, it was like two-lane highways, and he sent federal troops into Little Rock, Arkansas. This is so significant to enforce school desegregation. Can I get a witness for this? Desegregation, Jim Crow, trying to outline. We had, Wallace and all these governors like him. And I talked about Lady Beckwith and all those people that were a part of the Klan, trying to, there was a concept to keep this in mind. So in 1954, there was a decision on the Thurgood Marshall, Brown versus the Board of Education, to create equal classrooms. Before, everything operated under another law called Plessy versus Ferguson, and it was considered called separate but equal. So in other words, you have equal classrooms, but we're going to separate you. You heard of the white drinking fountain and the black drinking fountain. That's kind of how the classrooms were. Segregate, Plessy versus Ferguson. But Dwight D. Eisenhower sent troops to enforce school desegregation. My first job that I had coming out of graduate school was my master's degree. I was working on my first PhD. I went to work in the school district. I was part of the desegregation team. Decades later, we were still dealing with that situation in the 70s. I was part of a desegregation team. So his farewell address, Eisenhower said, he warned against military-industrial complex. Following him was John F. Kennedy. That is the Kennedy family. I mean, John F. Kennedy was pretty phenomenal. In my neighborhood, a lot of people say we got our first black president, John F. Kennedy, because he was all into civil rights. But Kennedy went through a lot, and during this time frame too, there was a lot of resentment toward Roman Catholics, toward Irish, and even toward Italians. We were still going through all these negative things against people by their own ethnicity or how they looked. Even Kennedy, even though he came from a good family, oh boy, I need to be more woke now. Okay. But key aspects of his administration was known for its youthful idealism and the New Frontier agenda. I was part of John F. Kennedy. He actually came to my grade school, and we had it was called President Kennedy's Fitness. So we would have to do shuttle. It was with the races we used when you had route shuttle things. But run back and forth, and you do sit-ups, and you you run a 50-yard dash out on the playground. You did all those things and climbing the rope. I will confess that rope climb was a monster. I, I didn't make it to the top on that day. I got three-quarters of the way. Um, I think I was a little bottom heavy at that, it was like, I don't get into that. But it was just funny. But the President Kennedy's fitness program was a big thing across the country. And you got this certificate and everything. Uh, I remember when he came to the school, there were Secret Service people on top of buildings and everywhere. Okay. The major events for Kennedy was the Bay of Pigs invasion was a major foreign policy, but the Cuban Missile Crisis, I can remember that so well, was successfully resolved through diplomacy, avoiding nuclear war. And he established the Peace Corps. A lot of people that were older, they would join the Peace Corps and those kind of things. And he committed the United States to landing a man on the moon. Unfortunately, I remember that day he was assassinated in 1963. I actually was delivering newspapers, and I remember the front of the page said JFK is dead. I remember delivering those papers with tears in my eyes in 1963. So the person that fell in line, of course, the vice president, was Lyndon Baines Johnson. He championed what was called the Great Society programs, where we, really the domestic agenda and major civil rights legislation that right now this administration is trying to take back. So the major Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. You hear about gerrymandering. That's what they're trying to do, is to eliminate, especially Black populations, from having the right populations there to be representative, to be represented as they vote. I can't get this twisted here. That's exactly what's happening. So he escalated U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, which ultimately undermined that presidency. A lot of people didn't want to be there. Why were we over in Vietnam and all that? But nevertheless, you can see the pattern here. You don't get a lot of controversy. I go back to John F. Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy was a good-looking guy, and there's no stories about he and Marilyn Monroe and all that kind of stuff. But when it came to the country, all these presidents that I'm talking about did not do anything to undermine the Constitution. Undermine the Constitution. Everyone takes that oath to uphold the Constitution, not to try to find ways to change it. We have a president that's talked about getting rid of the Constitution. Who came after Lyndon Johnson? We had Richard Nixon. This was kind of a touchy situation here. He was the vice president under Eisenhower. Okay, but then he expanded the United States' role in social policy, was primarily known for the Watergate scandal, the spying and the Watergate tapes and those kind of things. Major event, he ended the American direct involvement in the Vietnam War, but he opened diplomatic relations with China. That's we got those pandas. I remember that with Nixon, the pandas that came in from China, and initiated the policy of détente with the Soviet Union. So he resigned in 1974 to avoid his impeachment over the whole Watergate situation. He went out nobly. He didn't have to go through two impeachments, but we'll get to that. And he recognized, and I will say this, and I've said this many times, Nixon was a very bright person, but he got caught. But then he admitted to his wrongdoing. Following him was Gerald Ford. He became vice president after Spiro Agnew's resignation, and then president after Nixon's resignation. Spiro Agnew had a situation, it was kind of a mental health situation, that he didn't feel that he could do things, so he stepped down. He's the only president not to be elected to either the presidency or vice presidency. He was blessed. I don't know if I should say that. Most people would want that job, president or vice president. But I think it's pretty cool how he stepped into both those positions. His key aspects is he focused on restoring public confidence in the government after Watergate. Isn't that something? How can we get the confidence in our government back? But right now, it's a hot mess. So, what is Gerald Ford's major events? Controversially, he granted Nixon a full pardon. His administration oversaw the final withdrawal of U.S. forces from Vietnam. A pardon. But Nixon did not try to create an insurrection on the Capitol. Nixon didn't do all those kinds of things. He got caught spying on things. It wasn't 1,600 plus people being pardoned and more. Even before that, those 1,600 are other pardons. And we're on the cusp of probably getting convicted pedophile pardon. Just I can never say her first name, Ghislaine Maxwell. Okay, moving right along. Jimmy Carter, from 1977 to 1981, he was a peanut farmer from Georgia, governor of Georgia. He emphasized human rights in his foreign policy and faced significant economic challenges at home, including inflation and the energy. He also he was a Christian. I mean, a real Christian person. He understood that you do not try to convince people that the United States was formed to be a Christian nation. That's not true. Don't get it twisted. I won't make it up for you either. This country was not founded on Christian principles. And you hear these people throwing that out there. But Jimmy Carter understood it. He was a Christian. He went to church. Till the day he passed away, he was still serving the Lord, doing God's work, teaching Sunday school. And he understood what the nation was all about, the United States. He understood what the Bible was all about. He didn't get them confused. So he negotiated Camp David Accords in between Israel and Egypt. And his president was significantly impacted by his Iran hostage crisis, which lasted 444 days, ended just as he left office. I would also say that I had a good friend of mine that was an Olympian for the 1980 Olympics, Randy, and he never got to run. He was a 800-meter runner. And Randy Wilson, a good friend of mine, we actually was part of the same university. And he didn't get to run in the Olympics, but Randy, but he was a great basketball player too. Played a lot of noon-hour games, and Randy was a really great guy. Came from a small town. So Jimmy Carter, great person. God bless you. Then Ronald Reagan came along. Ronald Reagan was a former actor. I think it was called GE Theater. It was all in black and white. Ronald Reagan was an actor, and he did other movies too. And I lived in an area where he used to go. In fact, in both areas, he was at the WHO radio station in Deepport, and he also ended up with WHO. And I remember the place he used to eat at, this restaurant, cafe. I would go there and eat sometimes, and people always talked about. I remember when Dutch came in here and they used to call him Dutch Reagan, and a lot of people remember him being there. So he created his Reagan Revolution domestic policy focused on tax cuts, deregulation, and reduced government spending. They called it Reaganomics. Still, he was benefiting the rich. We'll tell you that. Major events. He took a hardline stance against the Soviet Union, referring to it as an evil empire. That's what he called it. But later developed a working relationship with Mikhail Gorbachev. And I remember Mikhail Gorbachev. I always remember his birthmark that was on his head. That was interesting. But this also resulted in the end of the Cold War. That's what they called it between Russia and the United States. So the Iran-Contra affair was a major scandal during his second term. Then followed him was George W. Bush. He was former vice president under Reagan, CIA director, and ambassador. So George Bush presided over the end of the Cold War and a successful military operation in the Middle East. The major events that he did was he led the international coalition in the Persian Gulf, Operation Desert Storm, to repel Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, signed the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now that particular act was actually created by a friend of mine, Governor Harold Hughes. And so anyway, I can segue into that another time. But his popularity suffered from an economic recession in breaking his, quote, no new taxes pledge. No new taxes pledge. So we went through a rough time with that recession. Then came Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, he was a former governor of Arkansas. So his key aspects is he presided over a period of strong economic growth and budget surpluses. He really boosted the economy. Became the second president to be impeached, though he was acquitted by the Senate. Major events around him was he signed the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, and he led interventions in Bosnia and Kosovo. Then, of course, he did have a little scandal here with him. He had the Monica Lewinsky scandal led to his impeachment in 1998, but he was acquitted from that. So he was having an extramarital affair with someone he shouldn't have, and that's, he was a man in authority, and he took advantage of his position. And but other than that, the country was doing well under him. Then came George W. Bush, okay, former governor of Texas and son of George H.W. Bush. Okay, he's the son, okay. Key aspects of his presidency, he was largely defined by foreign policy and national security issues in the wake of September 11 attacks. That was a tough day. I remember that I was in a school environment and all the classes just shut down and all the TVs was on, and that was so scary. He launched a war on terror, including the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. And of course, people didn't want, just like in Vietnam, no one wanted us to go there, to Afghanistan. But he also signed the No Child Left Behind Act and established the Department of Homeland Security. The 2008 financial crisis began late in his second term. You remember that 2008 crisis? People were losing houses, and like where we live at now, people were moving, getting houses for like $60 or $150. It's housing crisis. A lot of houses were vacant where we live at. Then came President Barack Obama, former U.S. Senator from Illinois, where I'm from. First Black president, they call it. But see, I have a problem with that. He was actually the first biracial president. His father was from Kenya, which is in Africa. So you can say he was African American because his mother was from the land of Toto and Dorothy and Annie Mae in Kansas. Her father actually fought with George Patton. So why is he called the first black president? Good question. I'm glad you asked. Because of the history of slavery from the one drop rule, and I've talked about that before. He, if you had 1 ounce of black blood in you, descendants of Africa or the West Indies, people just call you black. There's a whole bunch of people that are biracial and they get told that they're black. You. That's why I've told you, race is a social construct. You can look at a person, and a lot of times people are put into categories based upon their physical appearance. Even I have some people that are friends of mine that are Puerto Rican and or from Cuba, and they are told that they're black, and they tell you, "No, I'm Puerto Rican or I'm Cuban, or Mexico, Puerto Rico." But that's the United States. That's what they do to people. President Obama went through that too. So he accepts it. What is Major Pence? He, as I speak, this is under attack. He signed the Affordable Care, people call Obamacare, into law. And right now, we have a president that is out continually trying to take away the legacy of President Barack Obama. He and I have another clip I'll do next episode. He loves calling him Barack Hussein, and he emphasizes Hussein to indicate some kind of anti, Islamophobic pitch toward him. It's disgusting. I really feel the reason that he has this whole thing about getting rid of the Affordable Care Act, he wants to do anything to destroy President Barack Obama's legacy. A lot of people benefit from the Affordable Care Act, and they keep talking about getting rid of it, and that has woke me up a lot. They have no replacement for it. He also oversaw the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, ended the war in Iraq, negotiated the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, and the Paris Agreement on climate change. Now, here goes the twist here. We've had to deal with this twice. We have Donald J. Trump, elected for non-consecutive term in 2024. He got 2017, 21, then President Joe Biden was in there. Okay. So, and reason I don't have Joe Biden listed right here right now, but anyway, I'm just jumping to, and I apologize for that. But we have here his background: real estate developer and television personality with no prior government or military experience. That whole thing about not being in the military, and he's a commander in chief, doesn't know a thing about a rifle. But that's another story. His administration characterized by American first. We hear that thing, "Make America Great Again," MAGA stuff. National agenda and popular style. Is one of only two presidents who served 2 non-consecutive terms. Major events: he appointed 3 Supreme Court justices and signed significant tax cutting to law. Withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Agreement. Remember what I told you about what he's trying to do, President Barack Obama? He is one had the Paris Agreement and the climate change. Oh, but isn't that, and also the Iran nuclear deal? I just told you this. If you look up everything that Barack Obama did, he went in and redid. And he went into the first term seeing how he had this robust economy. The economy that he had was what President Obama gave him, he ran it into the ground. Another thing about him, he's been impeached twice by the House of Representatives and acquitted by the Senate both times, and responsible for the insurrection of January 6th. I must also add, the only president that ever sit in that White House as a convicted felon, 34 felony convictions. Like I said, you can't make this stuff up. And I apologize that I didn't have President Biden up there, but I want to just cut to the chase. So here we have this president that is trying to undo all of President Obama's legacy. So here, what is really happening in situation with this whole thing with President Donald J. Trump? And one of the things that I want to share with you that has happened has to do with Jeffrey Epstein. And just give me a few minutes here. If I can locate it, is that we know something happened to Jeffrey Epstein. So I'm going to start off. We know that he was involved, convicted, made a sweetheart deal for his pedophilia acts, and I mentioned Ghislaine Maxwell. So let's look. I want to just cut away and let you understand a little bit more about Jeffrey Epstein. But I want you to understand that we have a legacy of presidents that have never done anything with corruption like we're dealing with today.
And Sear, convicted sex offender and one of the most well-connected men in America, was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. The official cause? Suicide by hanging. But from the very moment the news broke, the world erupted with disbelief. How could one of the most notorious prisoners in America, awaiting trial on charges of trafficking minors, die under the government's watch, inside a high-security federal facility? This isn't just a story about one man's death. It's about power, secrecy, and whether justice was silenced before it ever had a chance to speak.
Those are
Epstein's
victims.
Final days. Epstein was arrested on July 6, 2019, accused of running a vast network that exploited underage girls. He had already been a registered sex offender since 2008, yet he mingled with billionaires, presidents, and royalty. Inside the MCC, Epstein's life was anything but normal. He was placed on suicide watch after an earlier incident in July, when he was found with marks on his neck. But astonishingly, he was removed from suicide watch just 6 days later, despite being one of the highest profile inmates in America.
I want to just kind of share some of the information regarding the marks on his neck. His cellmate, they were doing something in his cell, and his cellmate took some cloth and he put it around Epstein's neck, and there was a tussle in there. Epstein ended up with marks on his neck, and that's what they are referring to.
On the night of August 9th, Epstein reportedly told guards he wanted to make a phone call to his mother. Hours later, at 6:30 a.m., he was discovered lifeless in his cell. The perfect storm of failures. The official account raises countless red flags. Broken cameras. 2 cameras outside Epstein's cell mysteriously malfunctioned.
This is where it all began.
A third captured footage but was deemed unusable.
Epstein files.
The 2 guards on duty, Tova Noel and Michael Thomas, allegedly fell asleep and later falsified records to say they checked on him every 30 minutes. They were later charged, but their punishment was nothing more than probation.
Like cover up.
Cellmate removed. Epstein's cellmate was transferred shortly before his death, leaving him alone. To critics, this wasn't a perfect storm of coincidences. It was a setup. The autopsy dispute. The official autopsy concluded suicide by hanging, but Dr. Michael Baden, a renowned forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's brother, disagreed. He claimed Epstein's injuries, especially fractures in the neck bones, were more consistent with homicidal strangulation than with suicide. The hyoid bone, often broken in cases of strangulation,
My
raised
goodness.
alarm. Suicide by hanging can break it too, but in men Epstein's age, homicide is statistically more likely. So, was Epstein's death self-inflicted, or silenced by someone who feared what he might reveal?
Yes.
Motives to silence Epstein. Here's where the story explodes into conspiracy territory, but with real-world stakes. Epstein had connections to politics. Former presidents, Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, were both linked to him socially, though both deny involvement in his crimes. Royalty. Prince Andrew's friendship with Epstein and Virginia Giuffre's allegations
He's
put
lost
the British
his
monarchy in the
title.
spotlight. Business and intelligence. From Wall Street titans to global elites, Epstein's circle included names with everything to lose if details came out in court. His trial threatened to expose powerful figures across politics, finance, and even intelligence agencies. Dead, Epstein couldn't testify. The theories. Suicide, the official version. Epstein feared life in prison and took his own life. Supporters of this theory point out his previous attempt and his declining mental state. Murdered, the most popular belief. Someone with power ensured Epstein wouldn't reveal secrets. The broken cameras, the guards' failures, and the timing make this compelling. Faked death, a fringe but persistent theory. Some believe Epstein escaped justice altogether, replaced by a body double.
Well,
Photos from his removal from MCC sparked speculation, but no evidence supports it. The fallout. After Epstein's death, his longtime associate Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested and later convicted for trafficking minors.
Ghislaine.
But many argue her trial was deliberately narrow, avoiding deep dives into Epstein's network.
Sorry about that.
Feared life in prison and took his own life. Supporters of this theory point out his previous attempt and his declining mental state. Murdered, the most popular belief. Someone with power ensured Epstein wouldn't reveal secrets. The broken cameras, the guards' failures, and the timing make this compelling. Faked death, a fringe but persistent theory. Some believe Epstein escaped justice altogether, replaced by a body double. Photos from his removal from MCC sparked speculation, but no evidence supports it. The fallout. After Epstein's death, his longtime associate Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested and later convicted for trafficking minors. But many argue her trial was deliberately narrow, avoiding deep dives into Epstein's network. The public's response was captured in a viral phrase: Epstein didn't kill himself, and even protest signs showed how little faith people had in the official story. What really happened in Jeffrey Epstein's cell? We may never know. The broken cameras, the absent guards, the disputed autopsy, it all fuels suspicion that the truth was buried alongside him. But one thing is certain: Epstein's death was not just the end of a man. It was the silencing of testimony that could have shaken the foundations of global power. Justice cannot be for one side alone, but must be for both. Eleanor Roosevelt. Epstein's victims may never hear his confession in court, but their voices, unlike his, must never be silenced.
Very powerful. What really happened to Epstein? What really happened? You know, he's gone. We'll never know so many things, but we do know that he had a family. He had a brother that that did kind of share some his thoughts about his brother Mark. So I want us to listen to this, but just keep something in mind. I have something. Epstein, his death, it is believed that more than 24 people linked to his orbit in his life have died under mysterious or unusual circumstances. So I'll just kind of go through a couple here real quick. Besides Epstein, he died, of course, in 2019 from hanging. And then he had other deaths include Jean-Luc Brunel, a French modeling agent who died of suicide. And in prison while awaiting trial on trafficking charges. Thomas Bowers, a former Deutsche Bank executive who managed Epstein's finances, was also found dead by suicide. Mark Middleton, a former advisor to President Clinton, died from hanging and gunshot wounds, a death ruled as suicide. Hanging and gunshot wounds. That's some serious suicide, isn't it? Ephraim Reyes, Epstein's last cellmate, died. The cellmate, now there was never any proof of this, but his cellmate died from COVID-19 shortly after speaking with investigator Steve Hoffenberg, an Epstein associate who cooperated with authorities and spoke publicly about potential intelligence connections. You just can't make this stuff up. And died from an illness. Additionally, several of Epstein's accusers, including mentioned Virginia Giuffre, was by suicide. Carolyn Adriano and Lee Sky Patrick died in recent years with causes listed as suicide and drug overdoses. There's more people that died. Even his former attorney has died. So here we go. We have Epstein dying of suicide. A lot of people dying almost of the same way. It's almost like when Jesus had his disciples and people died all these mysterious ways. Even Peter died of crucifixion, but he was upside down. So that's, we have issues confronting the death of Epstein. So let's listen to what his brother says. She was interviewed by Aaron, who's on CNN. Listen real short.
From what you know, from what you saw, how close
Aaron
was your
Burnett
brother to Donald Trump?
They were very close. They were good friends. Jeffrey used to sometimes tell me things that Donald said that were funny. I know Donald was in Jeff's
and
office
Trump
a lot back
always
in the
says
90s.
how he really didn't have a relationship with him.
Donald flew on Jeff's plane a number of times. I don't know if they ever checked, but I know Jeff flew on Donald's plane also. I don't know if they've ever looked at his flight logs. And they were good friends. I mean, I flew on Jeff's plane. It's known I was on the plane in 1999, flying up from Florida, and Donald was with us. And we were all joking around. They were good friends.
So, tell me about that. I know there was something on that flight that you remember about your brother and Trump. What is it?
Well, it was a funny thing when we were talking, and stick a pin in that. A couple weeks or a week before that flight, I was talking to Jeffrey, and he told me that he was talking to Donald, and he asked Donald, "How come you sleep with so many married women?" And Donald's answer was, "Because it's so wrong." Now, amongst guys, it was a funny line. And then when we were on the plane a week or two later, Jeffrey asked Donald the same question. I know he did that for my benefit so that I could hear Donald say it. And Jeffrey asked him, "How come you sleep with so many married women?" And Donald said, "Because it's so wrong." Now, it's a funny line, but the answer is not the poignant part of the story here. The question is the poignant part, because for Jeffrey to ask him that question, number one, he would have to know that Donald slept with a lot of married women, so and he probably got that information from Donald. And
It
also,
implies a confidence.
That's not the kind of question you ask a casual acquaintance. How come you slept with so many married women? That's a question you ask a good friend that you can get away with asking those kind of questions.
Mark, from what you know, from what you...
So you heard it from the brother, telling us that they had a close relationship, talked about encounters with married women, those types of things. And I want to just jump ahead here because I want to give you a pattern. We have presidents that have gone through so many things, presidents that believe in the Constitution, presidents that believe in uplifting this country. And all we have here, we have a president's trying to get rid of people, brown people and even black people, trying to bring back separation and division, creating this whole concept of Christian nationalism that is basically white supremacy. We have all these things of divisiveness going on in this country. Where I gave you many decades of certain presidents that have never, ever stooped to the level of violating the rule of law and going against the Constitution. So, what about other things that have happened? And so, I want to go through this here just to kind of bring things up to date. You know, we just had a great swearing in of um, of the Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva. I can never say her name right, but I want to just look at these emails here. These are emails that have been out regarding here that has high importance. I've been thinking about that. Here's from Jeffrey Epstein. I want you to realize that this is interesting, that dog that hasn't barked is Trump. Then the victim, now people trying to say it was a graffiti here, but no one really knows that the victim spent hours at my house with him. He's never once been mentioned, police chief, etc. So the dog that hasn't barked, I'm going to get into that and where that phrase comes from. So these are very interesting, but I want you to keep in mind what that phrase might mean, a dog that hasn't barked. That dog hasn't barked is Trump. Okay. And then we have another victim in Mar-a-Lago. Trump said he asked me to resign. Never remember ever. Of course, he knew about the girls as he asked Jasmine to stop. Well, that doesn't mean he wasn't participating. Maybe he's participated enough that he wants to stop for a moment, take a break. He knew what was happening. This could mean several things. Stop because I've already enjoyed enough and I don't want people noticing things. Or was he trying to do a moral thing? I don't think so, but that's me. Then we have this other email that I want to share with us. Then this here's from Michael Wolff to Jeffrey Epstein. I think you should let him hang himself. If he says he hasn't been on the plane or to the house, then that gives you a valuable PR and political, public relations and political currency. You can hang him in a way that potentially generates a positive benefit for you. Or if it really looks like he could win, you could save him generating a debt. Of course, it is possible that when asked, he'll say Jeffrey is a great guy and has gotten a raw deal and is a victim of political correctness, which is to be outlawed in a Trump regime. So the plot thickens. Then Michael Wolff, wrote, I hear CNN plan to ask Trump tonight about his relationship with you, either on air or in scrum afterwards. So you can see by looking just these here emails gives you an indication that there was lots of, I use the term conspiracy stuff going on, but you can tell this. Now I want to show you what this dog didn't bark mean. Okay, it's a phrase taken from, Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote, the Sherlock Holmes stories. But there was a story about a horse called The Adventures of Silver Blaze, and published in 1892 in the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. So that famous line comes from Holmes pointing out the crucial fact. Now, Sherlock Holmes was like Columbo, if you're familiar with that TV special with Peter Falk. The famous line comes from Holmes, pointing out the crucial fact that the watchdog didn't bark at the thief, stealing the racehorse. The Silver Blaze was his famous racehorse, and it was being stolen. Didn't bark at the thief stealing the racehorse, implying the culprit was someone familiar to the dog. A deduction that solves the mystery. So here's how it went down. The venture Silver Blaze. The clue. A stable dog failed to bark during the theft of a famous racehorse, leading Holmes to deduce the thief was known to the dog. This is how it went. Holmes tells Inspector Gregory, "Is there any point to which you would wish to draw my attention?" Gregory replies, "To the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime." Holmes then says, "The dog did nothing in the nighttime. That was the curious incident," because the dog knew who was stealing the horse. The dog was familiar with the horse thief, the person that came in to steal the horse. So the dog didn't bark. So that also means that Trump is also familiar with everything else that Epstein was doing. He's the dog that didn't bark yet. My goodness. So we have a lot of cover-ups from many different angles within this whole process of the Epstein files. We know about Adelita Grijalva being sworn in finally, and I was going to play her tape, but I just want to finish with another person instead. So, and the reason I want to finish with this person because they are an attorney, but they are also a very powerful speaker. And I'm going to end this episode with listening to what she has to say.
Thanks so much for joining us. What stands out to you from these emails that were publicly released by the committee today?
Yeah, so number one, it is clear that he knew what was going on, which I think that he's kind of alluded to that at some point in time because the president said that he was trying to kick Ghislaine out of Mar-a-Lago because it seems like that's where girls were being recruited from based on information that we have. But more importantly,
Give me a
is
second.
that
I'll bring it back. Just give me a second.
Being Jeffrey Epstein.
There we go.
With Michael Wolff, who is writing this book or trying to put together this book. And in real time, as
Representative
Trump
Jasmine
his
Crockett.
first presidential run, we hear or we see that he made it clear that he believes that he has leverage over Trump. And he said that a Trump regime would basically open up, this is me paraphrasing, this is not exactly what he said, but basically it'd be a free-for-all. And as we've seen, especially in this second term, it's been a free-for-all where Trump has absolutely pardoned some folk that we know are terrible, and we are waiting.
As you listen, please like and subscribe to this channel.
Yeah, an important point
Helps
indeed.
out
Congressman, let's take
algorithms.
a closer look at that email from
And a
Epstein,
QR
where he
code
writes to
for
the
those
author,
that would like
Michael
to
Wolff,
donate.
saying this, and it's a direct quote, redacted victim, that name was redacted. Mar-a-Lago, Trump said he'd asked me to resign, never a member ever. Of course, he knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop. Obviously, we don't have the full context here, but I'm curious, how do you read this specific email and what it means?
Yeah, I think that it is showing that he was well aware and he was trying to cover his tracks at that point in time.
Woke.
And I think that that's what you saw from Jeffrey. Obviously, it'd be better if we could talk to Jeffrey today, but it was very interesting that ultimately Jeffrey Epstein died sitting in prison during Trump's administration.
We had on Representative Marlon Stutzman earlier. He's a Republican, and he tried to make the case that President Trump is the most investigated person in the world, and he has not been accused of any criminal wrongdoing here. What do you make of that?
Listen, they will do and say anything to cover themselves. You know, I will admit that Donald Trump has been investigated more than the normal, but he just happens to be more corrupt and more criminal than any other president than we've had. I will point out he is the only president who has been convicted of 34 felony convictions that we've ever had in the Oval Office. So while we don't know exactly what crimes he may or may not have committed, just think of it this way. If you know that you didn't do anything, then why is it that you would be twisting members of your own party's arms, trying to get them not to release it? Trying to get them not to release it. This would be exonerating. If you know that you are free and clear, then why not say, you know what, release the files? In fact, he campaigned on releasing the files because he didn't realize that anything that he was involved in whatsoever was involved in the files. But let me tell you something. Another thing that was said in that other email that he had with Michael Wolff was he was talking about if he wants to basically play hardball, we will make mention of the fact that he really has been on the plane, and I don't remember if it mentioned the island.
Let's actually put that email up just so our viewers can fully understand what it says. I just hope the control room can put this email up. It says, I think you should let him hang himself. And this is in response to a question of whether CNN would plan to ask Trump in a town hall about the relationship with Epstein. Epstein said, how do we craft an answer for him? And Michael Wolff says in this email, I think you should let him hang himself. If he says he hasn't been on the plane or to the House, then that gives you a valuable PR and political currency. You can hang him in a way that potentially generates a positive benefit for you, or if it really looks like he could win, you could save him, generating a debt. Of course, it is possible that when asked, he'll say Jeffrey is a great guy and has gotten a raw deal and is a victim of political correctness, which is to be outlawed in a Trump regime.
Yes.
That's the full email.
Yes. That is clear that Jeffrey Epstein had something to hang over his head. Why else or how else could you have a debt that you are able to? Now, exactly what it was, who knows, right? And that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. But the fact that Trump does not want these files to be out, to me, says that he has more to hide than him actually being able to exonerate himself.
And then the other email talking about that we used initially, I'm just trying to find that email so I can be really precise here, but it talks about
He's very good
how
at
Epstein is
breaking down from a
that Trump
legalistic
was with a victim at his house.
expression.
This is an email from April 2nd, 2011. Republicans were saying that that victim is Virginia Giuffre. As you know, she died by suicide. She's been very outspoken victim of Jeffrey Epstein. Here's the email right here on your screen. She wrote a book, as you know, and she did not accuse him of any wrongdoing. What do you make of that, and can you confirm that?
Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, it's redacted who the victim is, so I won't necessarily take the Republicans' word on who it is that's redacted. And I don't know why they would necessarily redact someone's name who is deceased at this point.
The Democrats did that, though. The Democrats redacted.
No. I understand,
Okay,
but I'm just saying, like, our biggest concern is to actually make sure that we are protecting victims. And obviously, she wrote a book. She told her truth. Whether or not she told everything, who knows? Again, another person that we can't talk to because we have yet another suicide around this. So I think that that's actually one of the things that we should talk about, is that the president has tried to call this all a hoax. I don't think you have this many people dying around a hoax. I don't think you have somebody trying to hide files around a hoax. We know that there's something there. We know that his own attorney general,
He knows about hiding files.
is in the files. But they are trying to hide
Confidential
stuff. The only reason
documents.
that we have these emails is because we were able to get them from the estate. Not because the Department of Justice was releasing information, not because Kash Patel was releasing information, even though they've had subpoenas from the Oversight Committee for some time. Kash Patel continues to hold back information. So I thank God that there is somebody that still respects the law and still respects subpoenas in this country, but it's not the people that are empowered to do it, the people that actually conducted the investigation. Imagine what we may discover if we got the investigatory information versus getting something from an estate.
Well, but we should also note that the head of the Oversight Committee is a Republican. It's Republican. The chairman is James Comer. And he is the one who is issuing these subpoenas.
Well, let's be clear about this. Okay. This is not something that he wanted to do. This was a subcommittee, remember? It has been the Speaker of the House who has consistently tried to avoid this by shutting down the House. So what the Speaker did is he sent us out on an early recess. But before we left, the subcommittee of the Oversight Committee that actually did the motion for the subpoenas, and the Democrats kept pushing, and some Republicans actually joined with the Democrats. This was not led by James Comer.
Like Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, I don't know if she's on that subcommittee, but Nancy Mace is on that subcommittee for sure. She's actually the chair of that subcommittee. This subcommittee, the ranking member is Summer Lee. So it was that subcommittee. So this was actually the tail wagging the dog. I just want to be clear about that. And ultimately, the
From
chair
Deuteronomy.
had a vote that was bipartisan, that was the majority, and he had to do it. But whether or not they have been like slow rolling this, there is no question about the fact that they have.
And you have had Marjorie Taylor Greene about Thomas Massey. It's been some Republicans who want the full floor vote on this.
Yeah, we've got four. 4 out of the 219 Republicans, yes, in the House. The rest of them seem to be okay with being complicit with protecting pedophiles.
You know, it's interesting. A CNN poll from last July showed that 50% of Americans were feeling dissatisfied about the amount of information released on the Epstein case. Did that have any influence at all on your decision to make these emails public today?
No, I mean, ultimately what's happened is, obviously, again, we've not been getting anything from the DOJ. Instead, it's been the estate of Epstein. And so as they've been turning things over, it takes staff time to review those documents and things like that to make sure that we've got something, number one, of value to the public. There's still additional information. I want to be clear. We got way more than 3 emails. But in their cursory review, they were able to say, okay, here are 3 emails that we think are of value. We do anticipate that there will be more that they will find that will be of value. They will go through the redaction process. They will also consult with the Republicans before we release anything. So it takes a little bit of a process, but I will say again that the estate seemingly has been more participatory than our own Department of Justice, who we actually oversee.
So where do you think all of this is heading?
Good question. I don't know, but hopefully it will start with the swearing in of Adelita Grijalva, as they have been avoiding that. Again, the House was shut down over that. I'm sure that the president has been making calls trying to get one of the 4 Republicans that did sign on to the discharge petition. I'm sure he is begging and threatening to get them to pull their names off of there. We know that they don't want to vote. We know that they called us in just for one day to work after we've been out since September. Again, we could be doing additional work. Even if this continuing resolution passes, we should be passing our appropriations bills. That's all the continuing resolution is for, it is in the meantime. But instead, it seems like they want to continue to be evasive so that they can slow walk this subpoena actually coming down.
All right, Congressman Jasmine Crockett, great to see you here in the situation,
Yeah.
and thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
You're always welcome to come back. Thank you very much.
I love it. The Situation Room. What a situation to be in. Jasmine Crockett. You know, I'm always reminded of Jerry Springer. He always has this closing, Jerry's final thoughts. Well, this is Dr. Staples' final thought. No matter what you're going through or what you may believe and what you are hearing, no matter what party you are in, remember her phrase is from Deuteronomy. If you're into this understanding the 66 books of the Bible that I have studied and I am ordained from, it's from Deuteronomy 28:13, where the Lord promised Israel to be the head, you know, of the chosen and not the tail. So it's like the tail wagging the dog. Well, think about it. The tail doesn't have that kind of power, but the dog, you to be the head, okay? The head, the tail wagging the head, so on and so forth. But you to be the head of something. The Democrats seems that they want to be in charge of doing what's right democratically. I like what she ended up saying, that we went through these emails and we want the public to know, want the public to be aware. And what's important about this is that we know, as Jasmine Crockett said, that the man in the White House has been the most corrupt person ever in the White House. I gave you about 70 years, 1953, of different presidents. And I apologize, I didn't include Joe Biden's name in there, but I'll do that next time I'm with you. Of all the presidents, even Nixon, even Clinton, even other people have never reached the depths of what Donald Trump has done. Grifting monies, making trillions of dollars while he's in the White House. Violated, different policies and acts, having parties on the lawn, and now, tearing up the East Wing, and that was supposed to go through a committee. He just went on and did what he wanted to do. I'm telling you, we, the people, are beginning to rise. We, the people, are beginning to rise and show, as we witnessed last time when I was here, the elections that took place. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, we have to provide for the peaceful tranquility of this nation. The Constitution is still strong, but it has to get presented in a way that people understand that there are people fighting for the rights of all the people of this country. No kings. Marches and rallies have been very effective. You can see the outpouring of wanting to have truth. That's kind of reminded me of the Superman, truth and justice in the American way. But we have to be more diligent. And my grandmother's always used the term, I was talking to a person at the gym the other day. My grandmother's always used the term mother wit. We have to have mother wit. In other words, common sense has to step in. It has to step in to provide for people to understand right thing. Use some common sense. Please like and subscribe to our channel, Race and Ethics, Bridging the Divides. You can also go to our website, Race and Cultures, bridgingthedivides.com, and get to learn more about our program, get to know a little bit more about me. And again, I'm Reverend Dr. Barry Staples. At some point in time, you'll see my co-host, Jennifer Staples, Reverend Jennifer Staples. She's busy this time of the year, but I'm glad that we were able to come together today. Please have a nice, safe weekend. Drive carefully. And as you're driving out there, remember the life you saved just may be mine and yours. Thank you very much. Love you. God bless you. And remember, do what Jesus told us to do. Love thy neighbor as you love thyself. Thank you for joining me this evening or this morning, wherever you might be. And until next time, God be with you, because I know God will be for you. Peace.